So let me give you a little background to what's going on. As part of my program, I was tasked to create a PLC and look through the data from the school and determine what we thought was the most pressing need. So Ms. Mangum was kind enough to share with me information that she had in her administrative data notebook, and Michelle Oliver also shared with me the MTSS data that the school has compiled so far this year. We decided that we wanted to work with reading because that is one of our weakest areas according to EOG scores, and I know it's one of our goals on the school improvement plan.
Right.
So this is what we found so far when we were trying to determine the most pressing need. We noticed that there was a fairly significant decrease in the EOG scores starting around 2015. You can see from this graph, we started looking at data in 2013, and there was a trend in it rising up to 2015, and then it began to fall again. Now, we threw around some ideas in our PLC. That one thing that we noticed in 2015 was that a lot of our funding went away from professionals, certified professionals, interventionists, tutors, and started going towards technology because we had to start preparing to be self-sustaining in the testing process for EOGs that were going online. So there was kind of that panic around that year, and I know a lot of money went towards that. So 2016, 2017, right on down to 2018, everybody was in that declining trend, except for 5th grade this past year. So this is our EOG proficiency scores from this year. So if you look at these proficiency scores, they're not nearly where our demographics and our population are expected to be.
Correct.
And so the question is, okay, what's going on? What's happening here? This is the number of students that were tested. This red area indicates the number that was proficient, and then you see a percent proficiency. And this is an overall average for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And this graph only shows regular education testing. It doesn't include anybody that was identified as exceptional children's, and of course anybody that was on the NC Extend is out of this as well. So this is regular ed, no accommodations. Another trend that we noticed when we were looking at scores, not only from 2013 to 2019, but cohort scores, where you're comparing the same students from one year to the next.
Correct.
The 4th grade decreased the most, and we have seen that trend over and over and over again. Is that 3rd grade, they have a lot of growth, but then they're being tested on the BOG, which is mostly 3rd grade objectives, things they haven't been taught. So you kind of expect that, you kind of consider it inflated, but then when you get to the 3rd grade to the 4th grade, there's a significant decrease, and we're trying to put our finger on what's happening there. Even though the decrease is consistent in 5th grade, it's less of a decrease in the proficiency. So we're just not sure what's happening. If it's a difference in the test, in the curriculum, in the readiness of the kids. I mean, we're just throwing around ideas. We just don't know what it could be. But what's interesting is starting in 4th grade, there is a decrease in proficiency all the way through grade 8 on reading EOG scores for regular admin. So we feel like there's a motivation issue there.
So is that just in Johnston County, or is that across the state of North Carolina?
Well, the data that I looked at was just for Johnston County. But I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't for North Carolina as a whole. Somehow, we're getting less and less proficient as the students get older and older. Then we looked at the subgroup trends. So over here you see all of the different subgroups, and I think the one that stuck out to me the most, because as the PLC we determined we didn't want to focus on students that were already receiving significant interventions like EC students or limited English proficiency students. We wanted to look at both race, but also this number right here, the economically disadvantaged students. Their scores tend to be lower than any other subgroup, with the exception of students with disabilities and limited English proficiency. Now, we don't know who these students are as teachers, but there are still certain interventions that we can do to increase their scores as well. Looking at MTSS student data, these are your students that on Tier 2, Tier 3, and then our MTSS committee also puts students on a watch list. And those that are on the watch list, Michelle calls them the bubble kids. They're the kids that they may have made a 2 on the BOG, or they may have made a 2 on the previous grade's EOG, but they're doing really well in class. So what is that missing factor? Why can't they, go the distance on the test? And she used a really good analogy about if you were to run a marathon.
Right.
That takes training. And she feels like these kids, in particular, the MTSS kids, are not training for that marathon. So they go into EOG to take that long 3-hour test with all those passages, and they just fizzle out. They just burn out. So when we looked at all of this data, the two groups that stood out to us the most were your MTSS kids and your economically disadvantaged subgroup. So at this point, our next steps as a PLC team is to research best practices for providing interventions for those two groups. The kids that are at risk of not passing a reading test, and then those kids that are affected because of their socioeconomic status.
Right.
So that's where we are right now. Do you have any insight or feedback you'd like to give?
I think these are some good beginning steps and starting steps. And as we mentioned, I guess the economic disadvantaged students, we don't necessarily know who those students are. However, those tiered kids, we do know who those students are. And so I think that would be a good starting place for us to maybe, target, so to speak, those students. And maybe within us targeting some of those students, we may be able to catch some of the economically disadvantaged students and overall help our school, help our kids, and help our scores.
Okay, I agree with that completely. Well, thank you for listening to our information, and we'll definitely keep you abreast, because the culmination of this PLC and this project is to get some research and an action plan and present it to everybody in administration and possibly the school improvement team as well.